Grace and peace to everyone. Good evening. Let's go ahead and go to God in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for the blessing of another day of life, a life to enjoy all that you have given us, to enjoy you and your presence with us, to enjoy the gift of your Son, to enjoy the gift of your Spirit. God, we thank you for the gift of your church, and as we gather as your church tonight, let us sit under the teaching of the Holy Spirit. Open these words to us in such a way that our hearts are captivated by them and we are transformed by them. And do it all for your glory. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, today we're continuing our study in the book of Daniel. We're on chapter 3. You know, the first chapter dealt with Daniel and his friends. Last week Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar and his dream and the interpretation. Today we're going to talk about chapter 3, Daniel's friends, as they encounter some difficulties. It's not. I was telling Robert, the Statler brothers sang a song through. They had an old album that went through the Old Testament. They had one called "The Fourth Man in the Fire," and I was listening to that while I was preparing this. So we're good to go. So if I start dancing, the tune's just going in my head. Well, we looked at the narrative flow of the book, how it's been going for us within the book itself. And chapter 1 introduced us to Daniel and his friends, and it told us how they got from Israel and into the king's court. And then we went into chapter 2, and chapter 2 showed us how Daniel became a top advisor to King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. And at the end of chapter 2, it tells us how Daniel and his friends got separated. Daniel was promoted within the king's court, and Daniel's request to King Nebuchadnezzar was that his friends be promoted in charge of the province of Babylon. So they were in charge of the province of Babylon while Daniel remained in the king's court. Chapter 3, as we get into that, as we just talk about the narrative flow of how it's going to push the narrative of the book of Daniel forward, it's going to introduce us to a rising tension between Babylon and God. Up to this point, Babylon has been God's instrument. I mean, think about how God allowed Judah to be handed over to Babylon and into King Nebuchadnezzar's hands. Think about how Nebuchadnezzar was called God's servant several times throughout the Old Testament prophets. And then chapter 2, we saw how God was revealing himself to King Nebuchadnezzar using Daniel. But that dream was all about revealing himself to Nebuchadnezzar and showing Nebuchadnezzar that he is in this position because God has set him up there. God has set up the king of Babylon to be in that position, and he was the golden head of the statue in the dream. And so today we're going to see where that tension begins to build. And we're also going to see how God's patience is also for Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Remember Israel. Right? God revealed himself to Israel, and it's not like Israel just bought into it and just was good all the way throughout. Right? We see God being patient over and over again, continuing to reveal himself in new and powerful ways. We're going to see the same thing here with Nebuchadnezzar, right? God has revealed himself through a dream. And what was the end of chapter 2? He was like, your God is a God who reveals mysteries. That's how Nebuchadnezzar knows God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's how he knows the God Most High, as a God who reveals mysteries. But if you notice, he still said, Daniel, your God is a God who reveals. And so God is still patiently revealing himself to Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to see that more deeply today. It also is going to show how God has the power. God's power is for his glory and with the people even during their exile. Right, we're going to see God's powerful deliverance of the three friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're going to see them and see their powerful deliverance. And this is a testament to the Jewish people, those who remain or those in exile, that God is still with them. that God is using his power for his glory and for their good, even in the midst of exile. So that's the way this is going to push the narrative a little bit forward. We'll get into it a little bit more deeply as we get into the text. The scenes, the way the narrative kind of sets up, the verses 1 through 7 kind of set up the setting. You know, where, when, what's the problem? And then we have 8 through 12, it's the Chaldeans, our friends, the Chaldeans, and the king. And then in verse 13 through 15, the king will interrogate the three friends. The three friends are going to answer in 16 through 18. The king will give his judgment to their answer. And then in 3:24 and 27, we have the three friends before the king after they're delivered, and we see the king's eyes being opened. And then finally, we have a resolution in the last two verses. And so this is one of the ways a commentator recommends us looking at the outline. And you can see our favorite chiastic structure again. He says that the opening is about the king's decree. And then you watch this is the Jews accused, the Jews threatened, the Jews confess their faith, the Jews are punished, the Jews are vindicated, and the king's decrees. This is a legitimate way to look at the outline. And this would be definitely a way, if in the Jewish communities, they were looking at this, this would be a way to look at this story. And if this is the story, then what is the very center and the point of the story? It's the confession of faith that we'll see of the three Jewish friends before the king. That would be the center. That would be the point. However, if you look at this, we're only seeing the three friends and the king in the outline. And if that's the outline we use, then we miss a major portion and point that this chapter brings out as it pushes the narrative along. And so I kind of take this and I say, well, what if we change the wording? And we make it like this. The king challenges God. The Chaldeans accuse God's people. The king challenges God's people. The true people of God are shown. The king condemns God's people. Then God delivers his people. And the king acknowledges God. You see where the difference comes in? In the previous outline, God was absent. God was a secondary player, if that's the way we look at the story. Well, in reality, this story in chapter 3 is about Nebuchadnezzar and God. The three friends are there, but they're very wooden characters in this passage. Right? The only developed character that we see in this passage is Nebuchadnezzar. He's the only one that we get an in-depth understanding of who this character is. The Chaldeans, we don't get an in-depth about them. The three friends, they literally say 3 lines. That's all they do in this text that we have. That's it. Right? They present 3 lines. We don't get how they feel. We don't get their what they're thinking. Remember in last chapter when it was about Daniel and the king, we got how Daniel felt. Right? We got what Daniel was thinking. We see Daniel and his friends praying, right? We see that they're developed characters in that narrative. In this, the only developed character in this narrative is King Nebuchadnezzar. And so the whole text is about King Nebuchadnezzar and his challenge of God. And that's what we're going to see as we get into this text. So let's look at this as we've been doing beforehand. Let's look. The setting, verses 1 through 7, the characters in this is King Nebuchadnezzar. And then this, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces. Okay? And I point that out because the use of repetition is going to show, again, add to the narrative and add to the point. All right? So King Nebuchadnezzar, whoops, I forgot to hit the button while I was saying. I just said those. All right. So where is this taking place? It tells us it's taking place in the plain of Dura. Do we know exactly where that is? Not exactly, right? Archaeologists have found things. They have several different sites. They said this could be it or this could be it. And each one of the sites does have some good points and some negative points. There is a site that was found by a French archaeological excavation in 1863 that's about 6 miles outside of Babylon, and they actually found a platform or a pillar that was large enough to hold a statue of this type. Okay, so that's possible. Could it have been another statue? Could it have been something else? Of course, but that is a possible place for it. When? We don't get necessarily a date in our text, but we do get the idea that it's somewhere around 586 BC. And I say that because in the Greek Septuagint, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, here's what it actually says. Verse 1 of chapter 3 says, "In the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, the king made a golden image." Now, if you read the text that you have, the English versions that you have, no matter which translation you have, you're going to read this. "King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits, whose width was 6 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon." We missed that whole first 18 year. That's not in the text you have. And we're going to explain why as it gets a little bit later. But what we do see is that this setting of this narrative is a time when Babylon Empire, the empire itself, has become settled. Right? Beforehand, it's been kind of unsettled. Remember the dream we had happened in about, what did he say, about 603, I think is what we said last week. I can't remember exactly. But it was a time when they were still having incursions into the west, and Egypt and Judah were still, kind of nipping at the empire. They didn't threaten the empire, but they were still nipping at them. Egypt threatened to have partnerships with Judah. And so there was always this worry. And so from 605 to 601, they were having incursions in every year. 601, they had the big battle with Egypt. That's a stalemate. After that, they kind of retreat to their borders, and Judah and some of the other smaller provinces stopped paying their tribute. So in 597, they have to take another trip back there, and they besiege Jerusalem, and they depose the king and send him into exile, put another king up. It's not until 586, when Jerusalem is destroyed, that the western front of the Babylonian Empire is completely secure. And what we see here now, it seems to be a celebration time. If you've got time to build a statue like this and call everybody together and have this celebration, then things are pretty calm in the empire, right? You're not worrying about being attacked on the western front. And so we see this kind of taking place at this time. And again, the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, again, counting the ascending year of 605, would put you at 586 BC. So at 586, so let's say right after the Jerusalem has been sacked, sometime later in that year, Nebuchadnezzar makes this golden image. And so why would this be a good time for him to do that? All right? Think about this. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar took the temple vessels and put some of them in his treasury of his gods, right? That's his first visit. 597, he comes and has a siege and deposes King Jehoiachin. He's only been in charge for 3 months and some odd days, right? But Egypt didn't help Judah. Egypt's kind of the one that's stirring the pot. Yeah, you should do this. We'll be right behind you. And Israel turns around and Egypt's not there. Well, in 586, again, they come and they besiege Jerusalem, Babylon does, and Egypt comes and helps briefly. The siege is lifted briefly, but then they quickly retreat back to Egypt and leave Judah all alone. And that's when when Jerusalem is completely sacked. That's when the temple is completely destroyed. Okay, so at this point in time, Egypt is no longer a threat. They're not defeated, but they're no longer a threat. Who's going to partner with Egypt after they've seen what Egypt did to their alliance with Judah? No country's going to do that. Right? Egypt's not strong enough on its own to destroy Babylon. So while they're not defeated, they are maintained within Egypt's boundaries and no longer a threat to the empire. And so Nebuchadnezzar has solidified his kingdom. Okay? Also remember this. During this time, the countries and the kings represented their gods. So Nebuchadnezzar has defeated all of them. The God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he defeated his people. He took the temple vessels. He destroyed his temple. All right? And that was the God who gave the dream. Right? That was the God who gave the dream. So at this point, when he feels like he's the strongest politically, and when he feels like his God and that he represents is now defeated all the other gods, as above all, here's where he builds this statue and has everyone come. Now this story has a lot of repetition. I've already talked about the names and the musical instruments, and the repetition of that applies some satirical elements to this. Right? Let me just read verses 1 through 7 and just listen to how it sounds. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You're commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the God that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, if you wrote that and turned it in for an English paper, they're going to circulate too much repetition, right? That's what you're going to get, right? They repeated all the visitors. They repeated all the instruments. How many times, and this you didn't hear as much, but the idea of worship or fall down, it's a little bit different in our English translation, but in the Hebrew, worship is used 11 times. Like you will worship this, you will worship this, you will worship this, you will worship this. And the idea of set up, how many times did you hear that? That King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. In the first half of this passage, the first half of this chapter, it's used 7 times. Okay? So think about this, right? The idea of the satraps, don't make me go through all of them. You know all those names, right? All the peoples, right? Like, this idea of King Nebuchadnezzar calls all these people. All these people come. When King Nebuchadnezzar says you do this, they do this when this happens, right? They have no depth to them at all in this story. They are puppets on a string. And that's the way this is supposed to sound, right? They come, they have no thought process, there's nothing to it. The king says it, they do it. The king is setting up everything. The guest list, he's telling the guest list exactly what to do and when to do it. He set up the music, you do this, you're dancing to my tune, right? The king has set everything up. Right? It's all about King Nebuchadnezzar. He has set everything up. And if we remember from last week, in chapter 2, verses 20 and 21, Daniel said this, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons, deposes kings, and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding." All right? So here in the previous chapter, we have Daniel saying, it is God, blessing to him who gives wisdom, and he sets up kings. In the very next chapter, we have Nebuchadnezzar setting up everything, right? The king is setting up everything, right? Oftentimes we think of this statue, I don't know about you, but a lot of people think of this statue as he made a statue of himself. But if you've noticed, the text never said that. The text says it's a golden statue, right? Most likely it's a golden statue of his God. Now I want you to take that into consideration, all right? In the previous chapter, we have Daniel saying, God who sets up kings. In this chapter, you have a king who's setting up a God that everybody must worship. And remember, he's the visible representation of this God on earth. King Nebuchadnezzar is, right? That's the way he thought. I am the representative on earth of our God who's defeated all your other gods. I am setting him up. You come, do what I say. All right? Earlier throughout this book, we said, remember how we've looked at it? God ordained and raised up empires, took them down. Like God was the one who was ordaining all these things. Here in this chapter, who's doing all the ordaining? King Nebuchadnezzar. Right? And so we get, right here, we get a universal point that I want to point out because I don't want to wait to the end because I'll forget it, is our sovereign God-given success often leads to the false belief that we are the sovereign gods over our success. All right, think about this. Last chapter, right, God reveals to him through the dream that Daniel interprets that God has given you, made you the golden head. And now in this chapter, about 16 years later, give or take, now that success has gone to his head and he sees that I am the one setting all that up. Right? And so this is what the story is about. Right? When we see this repetition and we see the woodenness where everybody, he's ordering everything. Right? They're just paper puppets on a string. Come, bow down when I say to. We'll play the instruments I say to. If you don't, I'll get rid of you and I'll put somebody else in. I'm ordaining everything. I'm setting up a God for you to worship. And I'm the representative of that God on earth. Right? We can see when we see that this whole chapter is about the King Nebuchadnezzar challenging God. The same God who revealed the dream to him last week, now he's challenging. And here's what he's saying. I am the God maker. I am not made by God. I am the God maker. I will tell you how it's going to go. Remember in the last chapter what Daniel says, the king, God has revealed this to you to tell you how it's going to go after you. Right? To tell you how it's going to go. And no, was he saying, I will tell you how it's going to go? You're going to come when I play the instruments, you're going to bow down. This is Nebuchadnezzar saying, I'm not just a golden head, I'm the whole statue. Right? There's never going to be an after me. Right? Remember he said, you're the golden head, and then all the rest of the body was those things that's going to happen after you. Nebuchadnezzar said, it's not going to be after me. I've defeated that God and all the rest of the gods. I'm establishing my everlasting kingdom. Again, there will be no after me, and this is a worldwide kingdom. Twice in the opening 7 verses we heard, O peoples, nations, and languages. Right? Universal. Right? And remember where this is taking place. The plains of Dura, we don't know the exact location of that is, but we know it's in the land of Shinar. And remember Shinar from Genesis was a place where they built the Tower of Babel. Right? At the Tower of Babel, they tried to make a name for themselves. God scattered them, but what did he do when he scattered them? Changed all the language, confused their languages. Look what Nebuchadnezzar just says right here. All people, all nations, all languages. This is Nebuchadnezzar saying, I'm the one who's reversing everything. God scattered you, confused your language. We're bringing you all together under my control. This is a complete challenge to God, right? Reversing the curse or the scattering, if you will. And so this was the narrative flow we talked about. And if we see this and we understand the first 7 verses that sets up the narrative, then we see that this is the point. God being challenged by the king, and the king ultimately acknowledging God. Right? That's the point of this. Right? That's the whole problem. That means everything else, it's just that working out. And that's why the other characters in the story, they're very wooden. There's not a lot of depth to them. We're going to see some things and we can learn some things, but that's not the key to the point, right? Here's where this challenge is going to take place. The Chaldeans accusing God's people coming before the king. And remember what he will say, King Nebuchadnezzar will say, who's the God who's going to deliver you from me? Right? That's literally the challenge he gets. Puts there, and we know who that is. All right, so let's go ahead on to to the next section where it says 8 through 12. The scenes in this character is King Nebuchadnezzar and the wooden characters of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are the only ones that speak, but we hear nothing about them. We hear nothing about them after this. They only say a few words, and that's it. All right. And verse 8 it begins, it says, accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up. That's all we hear from the Chaldeans. That's it. Okay? Now, we know the Chaldeans from the past, right? Remember, they were there. They were getting ready to be killed by King Nebuchadnezzar in last chapter. There's no one on earth who can do what you've asked, King. Only God who doesn't dwell among mortals can do that. Daniel goes in, intercedes on behalf of them, because what does he say? Hey, they were right. They weren't lying to you. They just didn't know the God who reveals. So they see this. They're alive, right? 16 years later, some of them are still alive who were there. They're alive. They weren't killed by the king, because the God who actually revealed to Daniel. Now, the Jews, Daniel and his friend, get promoted above them. That simmered for 16 years. And now they've got a chance, right? The Chaldeans, again, we don't get any depth with them, but they're put forward as the ideal Babylonian citizen. The ideal person of the Babylonian Empire. Why? They worship the king. Oh, king, live forever. We bow down, and there's some who don't. And they do that. Why do they do that? Because they want to set themselves up. They're images of the king. The king is setting himself up, ordaining everything. They're doing the same thing for themselves, aren't they? Hey, we're going to set this up because I get rid of them, then I get promoted in their place. Right? We're to see the Chaldeans not as particular individuals. We don't see them. They don't talk to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We don't see them. We're to see them as the ideal citizen of the human kingdom, reflecting their king and everything that he prioritized. They reflect, and they're trying to promote themselves while they worship the king and see them on a string. The puppets bowing down when they say to, right? No thought other than promote me. And then we have the three friends, and the three friends will then be called in to, I'm just lost my place. All right, and then the three kings the three friends will be a part of this area. The king's men will be a part of this area, and then our satraps and them will be apart. I was on the wrong slide. That's why I got to this. All right, so they were presented as the ideal Babylonians. I was like, I missed that. And their motivation is to set themselves up for their glory. All right, so what has happened when they come and do this? Now here's where you see the depth. All right? The king is furious. Listen to this. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought in those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound," here we go again, "of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you will be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" He's a furious rage. He interrogates them, right? Remember, he didn't believe the Chaldeans last time, right? If you remember correctly, they came in and he didn't trust them at all. He's like, "Look, I'm not going to tell you the dream because you're just going to lie to me." But here they come in and say, "Hey, they're not doing this." And he brings them in, he interrogates them, but he doesn't even give them a chance to answer. Nothing. You're going to either do this or die. That's it. That's your answer. And notice the repetition of the instruments again. What do we see there? Are you going to dance to my tune? Are you going to dance to my tune? Are you going to bow down and worship me? If not, you're going to die. The challenge is formally extended. That challenge that he was making, that King Nebuchadnezzar was making with his actions in verses 1 through 7, he's now verbalized. Who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Why is he saying that? I've destroyed your God. Your God's things are in my God's treasury. Your God's temple exists no more. You have no land. At this point, at 586, Israel has ceased to exist as an independent nation. Right? Judah is ceased. There's no longer the southern kingdom at all. Right? The formal challenge is extended. Now we get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego coming in, and they respond. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter." I love that, don't you? We don't need to do it. "If our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of the blazing fire and deliver us from and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." All right? So here we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We don't get a lot of depth for them. We don't see them concerned. We don't see them praying. We don't hear their thought process. What we get is they are presented as the ideal people of God in this situation. Right? This is the ideal response of the people of God in this situation. And compare the beginning of their address to that of the Chaldeans. Listen to the Chaldeans again. "O king, live forever. You have made a decree that everyone who does this." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they begin to address the king. "O Nebuchadnezzar." No title right there. Right? Now they will say "O king" twice in it, wherein they recognize the position to which God has put the king in authority, but there's no worship there. There's no adoration there. You know, when you go into the king, there's protocol, right? The Chaldeans are following the protocol. What? "O king, live forever," before you even address him, right? Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, "O Nebuchadnezzar." But we don't even have to give a defense for this. Why don't they have to give a defense for this? Because the challenge is not against them. The challenge is to God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they can do nothing here. Everything's out of their power. The only choice they have is either dance to the tune that the King Nebuchadnezzar has played, or they can be faithful Jews, faithful Israelites, faithful people of God. And they're being presented as the faithful people of God. They know their fate is out of their hands, right? They're not secret agents and going to turn the temple upside down, break out. That's not going to happen. Right? This is their fate is out of their hands. And so we don't need to present to you a defense. Right? And then we get to verse 17. Verse 17 says this in the text I've read. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. If you read the NIV or ESV, it reads this. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Okay? You note the difference there? And both of these are legitimate translations of the Hebrew text. Both of them. And if you've got a study Bible, no matter which translation, whichever one they use, most likely in their notes, it's going to say, or this one. Both of them are legit translations. The first one reads, if our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. It sounds like there's a question there, doesn't it? It sounds like maybe God can't. Then the second one uses that first word in the Hebrew is, let it be. That's what it is. Let it be. If it is. So be it, right? So literally, they don't know which that word goes with. They don't know if it goes with if God is, so be it. If God is able to, if so, or if we're thrown into the furnace. They don't know which one of those verbs it's to go to, whether it's deliverance or thrown into. So it can be either one. The Hebrew allows for it to be either one. So one looks like it's a question. And the other one looks like it's not a question of ability, but a question of if you do something, God's going to do this. There's no question God's going to deliver us, right? So which one do you think it is? That's a tough question, isn't it? Right? In one sense, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't know, if you take them as person, they don't know if God would deliver them. They don't know what's going to happen. And in that sense, they're put forward as the perfect Israelites and people of God, saying, we have faith in God. We're going to obey God. We don't know what the outcome's going to happen. But no matter what, we're going to obey God. The other one is, we have complete understanding. God's going to do this without a doubt. So we're not going to follow you. For me, I tend to like the first translation a little bit better. Because they don't, if I knew that I don't want to use let's say, if I knew the train was going, I was trying to think of something terrible, and I was like, I don't want to use. If I knew a train was coming, and I had to stand on a track, but I knew it was going to stop 5 feet in front of me, I'd have no trouble standing on the track, right? That's not faith, that's knowledge. If it might not stop and I have to stand there, that's a faith, right? Which was taking more faith. And so for me, talking to the Israelites or the Jewish people who are now in exile or who will be in exile, they don't know what the outcome of every circumstance will be. Their only job is to be faithful because of who God is, not because of what God will do for them. All right? So they're being faithful in the unknown of what's going to happen next because they're faithful in the God who's in control of all of it. And that makes more sense because there are some people, we read in the book of Hebrews, they go through the fiery trials and they don't make it. God doesn't deliver them, but they were just as faithful. Right? And so I like the idea, the thought of that, hey, if God is able to deliver us, let him do so. But if not, we're not going to bow down. Right? And so then they are obeying God no matter what, no matter where they're at. not because they know what he's going to do. Some translations of your English Bibles will actually hedge this a little bit. All right? And what they'll say is, our God is able to do this, but if he doesn't, we're still not going to, right? That's trying to hedge just a little bit of what the Hebrew's saying, because they don't like to say, well, they didn't know that God could do this, that something was out of his power. But the Hebrew doesn't mind being that black and white. It doesn't mind, right? Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't know. Have they ever witnessed anyone be rescued out of a fire? Probably not. They don't. Maybe God isn't going to do this. But either way, the idea is not that God can't do something. They just don't know. But they're going to follow God no matter what. Because they're being put forward as the perfect Jewish people, perfect people of God. 3:18 mimics Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5. It says, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Right? What do they say? What is the perfect response to Nebuchadnezzar's challenge to them? I will obey God. I will not bow down and worship another God, for our God is a jealous God, right? They are presented as the perfect people of God, of the kingdom of God, right? The ideal. So what is that? I love this. Nebuchadnezzar just gets irate, right? And so verse 19 we pick up. Verse 19 says, then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, into the furnace of blazing fire. Distorted face, right? Like, this is the depth of a picture of humanity versus God. Right? It's the ugly face of humanity going against God. This is what he's so furious. His face just is distorted. Doesn't even look human. Right? And that's an important point, right? And commentators and will pick up on this occasionally. Like they're so distorted, he doesn't look human. In other words, to disobey God, to challenge God, to go against God in this manner is such a distortion of who humanity was created to be that they don't even look human anymore. I mean, that's what it is. It's so distorted. It doesn't resemble anything that God has created in his own image. That's the picture we get. Right? And then you think the guard with the red jacket was bad, like in the first chapter, like No Name? Like, how about the No Name strong man that here? Like, obey me, pick him up and throw him in. What happens to them? They die, right? They blindly follow him, the king. They're part of the puppets on a string. And what happens to them? They die immediately because of the rage and the urgency, right? This is like they have the worst character of the whole book, right? I mean, their cameo is short-lived and it's painful, their exit, right? And so the king's men die. Those who stand against the king, who refuse to dance to the king's tune, those who don't fall before the idol now fall bound into the fiery furnace. All right? And so this is where the story gets good, right? Now we've fallen in. What's going to happen? If you have your hand out, this is where the insert would take place. All right? This right here, and I'm not going to go through every verse. I just wanted to give you this so you could have it. All right, if you have a English, one of our English Bibles, Protestant Bibles, regular translation, NIV, and you have the Apocrypha, this is actually called Azariah's Prayer and the Song of the Three Jews. That's what this is. And this is inserted after verse 23 and before verse 24 that we have. Right? And so I have this included. And let me show you how this came about, okay? Jewish scholar, let me get to this point. Jewish prophets and scholars, as they were collecting all the Old Testament scrolls and organizing the Tanakh, the Hebrew Old Testament, as they were organizing those, gathering everything under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, God is in control of all this. As they are doing that, they're putting together the law, putting all those scrolls together with the prophets, and then the writings, and all those come together as the Tanakh, and it's written in Hebrew and Aramaic, and that's finished. That compilation, everything's gathered together between somewhere in the 5th and 2nd century BC. By that time, the Old Testament Hebrew Aramaic canon is complete. Right? Nothing else is being done. That's complete. But during this time also, the scholars and prophets, the Jewish scholars and prophets, expand some. Right? To show connections. Right? These are all different scrolls. And so in order to show connections, they expand them a little bit. And part of the addition is what you have here for the book of Daniel. Right? And those are written somewhere between 2nd and 1st century BC. And most scholars there's very little disagreement that this was a later addition. These additions begin with a prayer of Azariah. Right? I mean, it begins and it's a long prayer. And then it always goes all the way to the back of the first page, so it's quite a number of verses. And then you have a short little section, which is verse 46 through 50 in your printout, and that talks about the presence of God, right, being with them. And I'll just read that section. It says, "Now the king's servant who threw them in kept stoking the furnace with naphtha and pitch and tow and brushwood, and the flames poured out above the furnace 49 cubits." I don't know how long a cubit is, but 49 of them has to be a lot. "And it spread out and burned those Chaldeans who were caught near the furnace." So other people were dying. "But the angel of the Lord came down into the furnace to be with Azariah and his companions, and drove the fiery flame out of the furnace, and made the inside of the furnace as though a moist wind were whistling through it. The fire did not touch them at all, and caused them no pain or distress." Okay? This is the idea of Isaiah, right? When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you go through the fires, they will not touch you. They will not consume you. All right? And then after that, we have two long sections of liturgical worship. It is long, kind of based after Psalms like 136 and those that have a lot of repetition in them. And so the last, let's say almost the last 3 pages are full of worship liturgical stuff. Right, now there is some doxologies in the Hebrew and Aramaic text, but these are so long that scholars say, yeah, they break up the narrative, and so most likely they were added later as these additions. And so we as Protestants don't consider these inspired texts. Right, they're historical texts and they're good for information, but not inspired. So how did they get it? How do we still have them? Well, around this time, all the Aramaic and additions are soon to be translated into Greek, the Septuagint. Right? The Septuagint eventually falls out of favor in the Jewish tradition, but it's widespread among the early church. All right? The Greek New Testament, the Septuagint, is what most of the New Testament writers are reading. They speak Greek, and so that's what they're reading. They don't speak Hebrew or Aramaic, most of them. They speak Greek, the common language. It's why in the New Testament you'll see some of the quotes that don't match up exactly. Like the Old Testament says this, the Scripture says this. They don't match up exactly. It's because they're using the Greek translation of the Aramaic text. Where in the Reformation time, right, during the Reformation time, Protestants went back to use what's called the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew and Aramaic. So from the 3rd century on until the 1600s, this edition right here was, this edition here was part of the book of Daniel. It's still in the Catholic Bible, still in the Orthodox Church's Bible, right? In the Protestant Bibles, it's listed as Apocrypha. In other ones, it's listed out just as you have right here. It's these verses, right? The Protestants, when the Protestant Reformation went back, they went back to the Hebrew and Aramaic text that the Jewish traditions had went back to that time. So that's why I show you this. I give you this to read, not because it's not necessarily we consider it inspired, but it is not a bad read, okay? It's not a bad read. It's great praise. And 2/3 of the Christian church have these texts. Right? 2/3 of the branches of the Christian church have these texts as part of their Bible. So when they're reading through chapter 3 has like 90-something or 100-something verses. Well, in ours, it only has 30. Okay, so you can see the difference. So again, it's for edification and information, but not spiritually inspired, is what we would call it. All right. But when we get to 2 more chapters, that breakdown you see, prayer, presence, and worship, you'll see why when they added these additions in the 2nd and 1st century BC, you'll see why those sections are added, because it fits perfectly with the whole structure of Daniel. You'll see that when we get a little bit farther ahead. All right, so there you go. The Protestants came later. All right, and so verse 24 in the English Bible, in the Protestant Bible, it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, 'Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire?' And they answered him, 'The king, true king, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the 4th has the appearance of a god.' Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace, and blazing fire said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 'Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here.' So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire." All right? And then our buddies, the satrap, the prefects, and the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of the head was not singed, their tunics was not harmed, not even the smell of fire came from them. All right. All right, so the 4th man in the fire walking around. Some scholars will say that's the pre-incarnate Jesus, okay? That this is Jesus pre-incarnate come in to be with the people, with the 3 in the fire. Others would say, no, we don't want to go that far. It's the angel of the Lord that's in there in the fire. Either way you want to look at this, the idea is that God is present with his people in the midst of the fire. And did you notice? They were unbound. They did not bow before the idol. They were bound and thrown into the fire, and in the midst of the fire, they're unbound and walking around. Like, what's the point of that? Think about to the exiles. It is better to be bound and thrown into the fire, and you will find freedom in the presence of God, rather than bow down to an idol and face the God that you have turned from. Right? That's the idea. It is, and so the 3 Jews are delivered, right? This is a deliverance. They are delivered. Who can deliver you? What God will deliver you from my hands? Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we don't have to answer that. Why? God answered. Right? The Jews are examined, and I love the very ones who bowed down at the tune of the king. They're the ones who says first examine Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they come out, and find out the ones who did not bow, who disobeyed the king's decrees, that nothing happened to them. God delivered. Their God was stronger. Right? All right, and so just a couple of passages. I'm just going to run through these pretty quickly. We're running a little short on time. Jeremiah, talking about the fiery furnace, what is this imagery? Jeremiah 11:4. speaks of Egypt as being the iron furnace or the fiery furnace of iron. Deuteronomy 4:20 also says that Egypt is the iron furnace. So God has put you and tested you in the iron furnace, the fiery furnace in Egypt. Isaiah uses that term for Babylon. All right, it's the furnace of adversity. Peter, 1 Peter, right, talks to the beloved and said, don't be surprised, beloved, at the fiery trials that have come upon you, right? Don't be surprised. And Jesus talks about the fires of hell in chapter 13:42, right? So this idea of fiery furnace, how are you delivered from the fiery furnace? Whether it was Egypt of Old Testament, Babylon of the exile, whether it's the New Testament in the trials of the church, or if it's the eternal fires furnace of hell, how are you delivered from that? Only through obedience to God, right? Through God's grace and his obedience. That's the bigger image. And so at the end of this, we get the decree from Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Let me ask you a question. What weight have we seen that the king's decree actually has? All right, he had a decree. Hey, I decree if you don't tell me, I'm going to kill you. Last one. God overthrown that through Daniel. Nobody got killed. Here, you don't bow down, I decree you're going to get killed. Doesn't work. Right? The idea to the exiles is this. The king's decree has no authority over you unless God gives that. Unless God allows it. Right? The king has no authority over you. And so he acknowledges, but he acknowledges their God. All right, again, being patient with Nebuchadnezzar. It's the God who reveals, now it's the God who delivers. So their God is the God who both reveals and a God who delivers. Next week, we'll see even God go a little bit farther with him, right? And he promotes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So now we'll wrap up with these questions that we always end with. What does this teach us about God, about humanity? What's intended a message to the original audience? How does this point to Christ? And what are we to take from this? What's the first one? God is sovereign over all. It's going to be there every single week, so that one's there. God is patient to reveal himself. We saw how patient he was with Israel. He's just as patient with those who weren't in Israel, right? He's revealing himself. God is with his people even in the fiery furnace, whether that fiery furnace is exile or if it's the trials of the church or if it's the midst of it when they were in Egypt. He is able to deliver and will ultimately vindicate his people for his glory. Right? What does this teach us about humanity? Humanity seeks to set up our idols to worship. Right? All of us can think about that. What have we set up in our own lives to worship? Or how do we set ourselves up in front of other people? Right? Isn't that one? Like, how do we always present ourselves just a little bit better than we probably actually are. So again, we set ourselves up. Right? Humanity lives in unseen chains within the earthly kingdom. The satraps, the magistrates, the counselors, all those bound by the unseen strings of the king, right? Going. And so the question is, how do we do that? What are the unseen things that change us in our culture? Like, what are we bowing to without questioning in our own culture, right? Every culture has them. We're just blind to them when you live in them. It's easier to look at somebody else's culture and say, look, this is what they do. It's harder to look at us, right, to see that. What is the intended message to the audience, original audience? The king's decrees are subject to God's authority. Imagine living in exile. The king's decrees change at the whim of his emotions, but they're all subject to God's authority. God is with them in the fiery furnace and able to deliver them. Their faith in God will be ultimately vindicated. Right? And it is better to fall into the furnace as a people of God than to fall before and worship idols that cannot deliver. Finally, how does this point to Christ? Well, the fourth man in the fire is obviously the presence of God with us, and ultimately the presence of God with us is Jesus. This one here is a larger one. Jesus will walk the same path but will not receive the miraculous rescue. There was an accusation, a trial, a verdict. They were punished and they got delivered from that punishment. Jesus will have an accusation. It'll be an unjust accusation. There'll be a trial. He'll be found guilty. He'll be punished, and God doesn't deliver him for our sake. And finally, in his presence is true freedom, even if it's in the midst of a fiery furnace. Think about them walking unbound in the midst of the fire. Freedom. Those who Christ has saved, those who the Son sets free is what? Free indeed, right? No matter where we're at. What are we to take from this? I always put first off, what is the assurance? God is with you in the fiery trials, and his presence, we are truly free, whatever we're going through. Whatever we're going through, whatever trial it is, God's with us, and we are not bound by any of it. We are free, right, in him. Challenge to live out our faith when the immediate outcome is uncertain. Right? How many times do we want to try to figure it out on our own? It's easy to live faith when we know how it's going to be easy, right? We know the outcome's going to be easy. Question, where have we bowed down before the idols of this world, worshiping to the world's tune? And finally, gratitude. For Christ, who lived the perfect life of faith for us, died the death for our sins deserved, and delivered us from eternal fiery furnace. All right. Well, I kept you a couple minutes over, so let's go ahead and close with prayer, and then I'll turn off the video. God, we give you thanks that you are, God, gracious enough to meet every challenge that sinful humanity has thrown your way in order to reveal yourself so that none of us will be without excuse. God, we thank you for your presence with us in the midst of whatever trials we might be facing. We thank you that even in the midst of the trials, we can truly be free because we walk with you in your presence. And God, we ask that you would help us to live as a reflection of Jesus, who truly was and is the perfect reflection of the children of God, the Son of God, who lived his faith perfectly, who was tempted as we were tempted, but did so without sin. Fully reliant on your word. Every time he was tempted by Satan or by the world or by his own friends and who betrayed him, his answer was to be faithful to the word of God. We thank you for his image and ask you to transform us more and more into that image. We ask all this in his name. Amen.